Thanks, Colart. Perfect, that sounds great. Okay, so I need to start with two notes. One is that I heard I have 7 minutes to talk about whatever I want, so that's what you're getting. This is something I care about. It's not necessarily about my startup, but I'm happy to talk about that too. The second thing I want to say, which transitions pretty nicely into the topic, is that I am incredibly stressed about this election, and so bear with me. But what I will say is that it's a great transition to what I want to talk about, which is, especially in the startup space, we spend a lot of time talking about founders and leaders. And as we're seeing today, the people that we choose as leaders can be incredibly flawed. So I would like to talk more about how we can all be everyday heroes. One, because we have the power, and two, because I think our world needs a lot more of that. I love this photo. So I think the best way that we can be everyday heroes is through our words. I know a lot of people think that words are small and not very meaningful. So let's talk about that for a minute. This is an image that my husband, who's Kiwi, showed me a little while ago. You'll notice that New Zealand is not on the map. He was not happy. Neither were the people on this subreddit. Neither were the people on this Tumblr page. So New Zealand, 2 words left off a map. Still frustrating, right? Now add to that a bigger social and political problem. This is a map, or it's similar to a map, that I showed in a presentation that I did in Jordan. Afterwards, a few Palestinians came up and said, Lauren, Palestine wasn't on your map. For a group of people that's fighting for recognition of their full statehood, that one word means a lot because it erases an identity that they're trying to claim. And then, because I like data, this is the one reference to what I do in my day job, I wanted to pull in some research. So the research shows that verbal abuse actually has the same impact on your brain as does physical pain. And if we look specifically at research around a particular type of verbal abuse, so the objectification of women leads to increased rates of depression, increased rates of eating disorders, lower cognitive functioning, lower GPA, and a lower sense of political efficacy. So hopefully by this point, you are convinced that words have power. I'm about to show a few words that we don't normally talk about in polite conversation, so bear with me. Okay, so this was meant to come up with animation, and that has gotten erased. But on the left side, you can see we have a lot of words that come from a female origin. And on the right side, you can see words that come from a male origin. One quick side note is that gender is not binary, but one of the problems with how our world talks about gender is that it addresses it in a binary way. So I want to acknowledge that. So if we start with bitch, and my surprises have been taken away, but bitch comes from breeding terminology. So it's a word that's used for a female dog. The equivalent is stud, which is used for a male dog or a male horse. Think about the difference in meaning for a second. Next, whore. Gigolo, not quite the same because it's a male prostitute for wealthy women. So the closest equivalent we have is to add man to the front of it and say man whore. Slut. That is a word that doesn't really have a male equivalent, except that you can use the female term to talk about men. And then finally, cunt and pussy. Not really anything equivalent for men. Again, you can use these words at men or dick. So I hope that makes you think, well, okay, a few observations. The male terms are much less harsh and sometimes even positive. And in fact, the harshest thing we can do in our insults against men is to call them a woman. So hopefully you're ready to do something about this. I'd like to show a spectrum of action. One is going along with it, because not acting is an action in its own way. And not engaging. So this would be if someone tells a sexist joke, not laughing. And then here on the far side, we have active response. So hopefully, what I've said so far has convinced you not to go along with it. And not engaging is a good way to start, but what I want to focus on is the active response. These are a few ideas that I've seen to be helpful in my life. So one is naming it. My husband, is really good at this, when he hears his friends say the word cunt, he will say, when you say the word cunt, it's degrading to women. So it's as simple as that. This is what you did. This is the impact. Humor. My favorite example of this is the word pussy. So when I hear someone say, he's a pussy, my response is, oh, so you think he's pretty strong and resilient, right? Which usually gets a laugh and brings about the desired point. And then finally, bringing in data. So second reference to what I do in my day job. For this one, I want to share an example in my own life where when I first came to New Zealand, I had the perception that most of the iwi who'd received Treaty of Waitangi settlement money had actually squandered that money. When I went to a presentation on the Maori economy, I learned that of the more than 30 iwi that have received settlement money, only 2 have actually wasted that money in a measurable way. So again, we see not only do words take these social inequalities and reinforce them, sometimes they create false realities that aren't actually what's happening in the world. And then finally, a note on good advocacy. So I have been fortunate to have men in my life that call out sexism, and I've tried to pay that forward in areas where I'm privileged, such as by being white, or middle income, or speaking English, or the list goes on. Something that I've found is that wanting to help is not enough, unfortunately. I have had to do a lot of listening and learning, and I've been fortunate to have friends who kindly and firmly have called me out when I've made mistakes. So I hope that you all have and can be those friends for each other as well. And the biggest thing, I think, is really making sure that when we are the privileged ones, we use our privilege to create space for those marginalized voices. I would like to end with a quote, which isn't particularly uplifting, but I think is especially important. Martin Niemöller was a Protestant pastor in Nazi Germany. He spent 7 years in a concentration camp. This, I hope, is the call to action for all of you for why we should be everyday heroes every day. And I'll just let you read it. So I hope that we all choose to speak out. Thank you.